Hello and welcome to the Day Witness podcast. Today's guest does not need a lot of introduction because she has been in many of our episodes, most of our episodes, as the interviewer. But today it is her that sits in this chair. She will be receiving our questions and she will be telling her story. We're excited to have you in our last episode.
Thank you.
So today, Kaman, why did you decide to be the one to be interviewed?
Well, partly because during this journey of producing the Day Witness podcast, but also throughout the year or the years, is that people with my skin color in particular are invisible, particularly when it concerns racism and discrimination. We often are in the background. There's also a very silencing culture within the East Asian community where we don't want to sort of speak up and rock the boat, thinking there might be a backlash and how people may think about us, we're complainers, we don't want to be one of those kind of thing. So during this journey, speaking to quite a few from my own community, East Asian community, that we do need to speak up, we do need to do a bit more. And so this is kind of my way of showing up for this particular topic and talking about my own experiences here, but also my journey when producing the Day Witness podcast, what I've learned and the humbling experiences of that. And I kind of want to contextualize a little bit of those who are listening into this podcast or being introduced to it, to kind of look at it in a different angle, I guess, from my insight to this topic and also what I've learned from it. And hopefully the takeaway message wouldn't be to kind of aggravate anyone in a certain way, but rather from a state of openness, compassion, and also as something that should concern you, even though it may not impact you directly, but it should impact you in a certain way, and how we want to sort of move forward as a society together.
I agree. This takes me back to the first conversation we had about this production, the podcast. Yeah. Remember, we were at Starbucks and you were introducing this project to me. Yeah. And this is exactly how I felt when you were telling me, oh, this is what we're gonna do. This is and having that in the past few weeks, the past months, it has been an eye-opening experience, especially for me. And so now that you're telling this story and we're gonna share it with everyone who's gonna be watching this, I think it's gonna be very empowering. Tell us about your first discriminating experience here in Norway.
The very first that I remember was actually taking. I was a student many years back. It was in 2006 to 2007. Was it 2007 to 2008? Can't quite remember. Anyways, those years, many years back, and my classmate who was Norwegian, she was feeling very, very sick at the time when she was coming to class. And, I'm kind of the person with the innate nature of protect and serve. So for me, I wanted to kind of help my friend out, my classmate. So I said, I'm taking you home. There's no from you. I'm taking you home. So I took her home, and once I took her home, and I had to wait at the metro station at the time for the next one to come so I can get home. I was alone at the metro station, and this elderly guy came past me and stopped in front of me. And I was kind of sitting down and just listening to my own music kind of thing and doing my own thing, playing around with my phone. And even though at that time I didn't speak a lot of Norwegian, I kind of knew what he said, and he basically told me to fuck back to China, basically. And I kind of kept my head down. I didn't want to make any eye contacts with him. I was quite young then, and I was kind of scared. And I couldn't really see anyone else on the platform, just me and him. So I didn't want to aggravate him. And so I just kind of ignored him as much as I can. And I think at that point, you know, he said what he had to say, and he said a bit more, but I kind of tuned out at that point. And then he walked off. And then in the corner, I see this lady with her pram came past me, and she looked at me and said, "Are you okay? You know, I'm so sorry what he said to you." And I kind of just said, "It's okay." But it's not okay, actually. It's not okay at all. But it was at the point where it's just like, you know, the fact that she felt she needed to apologize on behalf of this man. And then at which point I kind of went home, and I didn't really think too much about it. So that was kind of my first reaction, really. And then afterwards, you know, when I actually did move back to Norway after finishing my degree and came here, another incident that happened that really kind of hit home was I was on a queue. You know, when you have Posten, like the post office, and you're kind of queuing up to get your parcel and things like that, or you're sending something. So at that point, I was sending stuff back home because I was actually considering moving back home. And then it was a huge line, and we were all standing on this queue. And then I saw this lady who was Norwegian, and she went into another queue line, but no one was there. So it was in our queue where there was someone who is kind of so someone like who is sort of manning the cashier. What's the English now? I was speaking sometimes Norwegian, so like so someone who was kind of like at the cashier. So I see this little lady going into the other side, and she was the only one. And then she realized, oh damn, there's a queue here, like, and there's no one's going to come there. Obviously, they didn't have enough staff. So she actually walked right up to me, beside me, and said in Norwegian, like, "You took my spot. This is my spot here." And I turned back to her in my bit of Norwegian and said, "Tuller du meg?" I was like, "Are you kidding me?" It's just like, why are you asking me and not anyone else here or here? Because I was the only person of color on that line. Everyone else was white. Everyone behind me were white. I said, why are you asking me and not this woman in front of me or that woman behind me? But why did you ask me? I said, I'm not leaving. This is my spot here. You could go right at the back. And I think like her reaction was a shock. Like, I don't think like
it's like she was not expecting you to react.
Fight back, you know, and actually understood what she's saying. Like, because like I immediately knew something inside of me ticked and triggered and like going like, I'm not going to let you do this. You know, and then she went out of the back because she stood for a good few seconds right next to me. I didn't even like look at her. I at the point was just like standing in my queue, not going away. I had my rucksack with me, stuff that I was going to send back to England. So I just stood there. And eventually she left. But no one in that queue ever stood up to me, or stood up for me. No one there was kind of feeling any shame almost.
As to what was happening.
No one was even like that first incident that I had where the mother with the pram came up and said, I'm sorry that happened to you. No one. So I knew that I was on my own, you know. And then that was the second experience I remember. The third experience I remember very, very, very much so was when I was still with my daughter and her father. I knew the owner that we were renting from, she didn't like me at all. You know, instantly when we had the first conversation, she said that, how do you feel living in like this suburb, you know, like, you know, how do you feel like living in a city? Like somehow I was coming from a village or something. Like I was like going, woman, I'm from England. I'm living in this freaking city. It's
a weird question to ask.
Right, like where do you think I was from? Exactly, in a ghetto? In a like, I don't know, shabby place? I don't know. It was just kind of like funny. I didn't really think too much about it. But then there was an incident where they had this garden outside. It was beautiful. It was summer, and I wanted to take my daughter out to play a little bit of football, kicking around, having fun. And then she stormed out and told me that you're not allowed to play here with your daughter. You're not allowed to play in this garden. I was like, excuse me? I was like, okay. Since she's the owner, there's nothing I can say. And she literally lived next door to us where we were renting from. So we kind of went back in. But then I realized there was a lot of occasions where her father, who's a white Norwegian, took her out in the garden and play. He never got a complaint. So that was kind of unfair treatment. And there were times where I realized like she really didn't like me. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the fact that I'm still trying to understand how the culture is. I don't know what it is. And then eventually, like when we separated, I was, kind of moving things back and forth to my new apartment. So I remember at one point I bumped into her and I looked at her and we had like this, I couldn't really quite remember the conversation, but I just saw this look on her face of disgust seeing me. And I basically told her like, you're not going to see me anymore. And I'm not going to see you anymore. Goodbye. And I kind of walked off. It's just, those kind of positive experiences, and now like there were other experiences, of course, like I've been in Norway for like 12 years now, counting and more. And it's kind of those experiences that still leave a mark on me, and it still kind of reminds me of those incidences. And of course, like before I came to Norway, back in England, I had my own terrible experiences of racism as well. So that was on top of the experiences that I was experiencing in Norway. It was an accumulation of all the experience I had during my childhood in England as well.
We also want to know what the difference is with your experience in your home country and here in Norway. But before coming to Norway, did you think, did you kind of expect, what was your vision of how it's going to be in Norway, how different it's going to be?
Honestly, when I first came to Norway, I thought people were extremely nice. I thought they were very helpful, because I remember an incident when I was a student, so I didn't go to Gardermoen, I went to Torp Airport. So that was far out. But when I landed in, so then I was talking to and it was snowing as well. It was really winter, lots of snow. And I wanted to catch a bus back to Oslo, in the central area and everything. And then they told me, oh, the bus is not running. The coach is not running. And I kind of like, what do you mean? It's not running. I was like panicking. And then I remember like talking to this coach driver that was like outside the airport. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm really stuck. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm trying to get back to my student hall. And then he said that, jump on. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take you to the next stop. And then you can actually take that bus back to the city of Oslo. And that extra mile that guy did for me, he didn't have to, but he did. I just thanked him so much. I was almost in tears. And then because of that, like kindness, like I felt like good, because it's not something that I feel like in England I would experience that kind of kindness. But when I had that, I got a very good impression of Norway. And then when that happened, and then like this, and then there's a couple of instances where Norwegian really shone through for me, like a place that I kind of feel like, of course, racism experienced in different countries, but, in Norway, I didn't really feel the kind of, the backlashes or the kind of experiences that I had experienced in England, particularly. So the impression I had was Norway were like incredibly intelligent. Like, I always find it fascinating just how they used wood to build their homes. Because I felt like you got winter, the snow, it's wet. How could you use wood? Because I would think like wood is going to crumble. But they're really, really good. So there's something that made me really, really fell in love with Norway in a way. And the people within it, I got really nice classmates as well who were very supportive. And just generally the experience that I had, although it wasn't a long experience because it was my Erasmus year, but the impression I had was that this was a nice place to live in. I didn't think too much. Obviously now that I lived here a little longer, things really started like
to come out.
Yeah. And the biggest difference I would say between here in Norway and in the UK is that in the UK it's much more physical. It's really up in your face. People will tell you, people will even punch you or even like throw stuff at you, you know. I remember when I was a kid, like riding a bike around, I had mud thrown at me, I had stones thrown at me, you know, and then I couldn't bike anymore in that area. But also like witnessing my parents getting beaten up at the age of 7. You know.
Yes, tell us about those stories. I know a lot of. I mean, me meeting you, I wouldn't think that was your experience. But I heard little tidbits of that story. But can you tell us about those stories of discrimination experience that your family has experienced in the UK?
Yeah. So basically, I'm a typical British-born Chinese, so a BBC. So basically, we live above a takeaway, Chinese takeaway. And most of parents, you know, live their lives out like that because that's their only way of making income. So from my eyes, my parents are always entrepreneurs in that way. And then when we live above a takeaway, we see a lot of things. So when I was growing up, you know, I see my parents being beaten up when I was, 7 or 8, because I heard noises downstairs, and I remember like coming down the staircase, and then like on the counter where you have this door. So I kind of pushed open that door, and I looked out, and I saw like sort of my mother, this lady who's white was pulling my mother's hair, and then I saw my dad in the headlock by this other guy, and I just remembered like just standing still, just froze. And then my sister, I felt her yanking me from behind and then like pulling me back upstairs, and I just remember like sitting on the bedroom bed, and the door was locked, and my sister was on the phone to the police. And I remember just feeling in shock, like that was the world I was living in, you know, that my parents were trying to protect me from. And very often our takeaway gets sprayed paint, and we get eggs thrown at us, telling us, you know, should we fuck back to China and all that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is that it wasn't just white British people doing that to us. It was the Pakistanis that were living in my community that were doing this. Because in both cases, they were saying that we were stealing their jobs. So I would often, like there was one incident at school where there's this boy that keeps bullying me. And the parent actually stopped me at the gates, just as I was going out of the school. And she would say like, you're bullying my son, and you are stealing our jobs. And I was 10 at the time. I was like, excuse me, but I'm 10. Like, how can I steal your job? Like, I can't even work. And I remember telling the incident to my mother, my parents, and obviously they were upset. And there's a lot of incidents like that. I remember like at one point my mother stormed into my school, and we moved school. I had 2 schools that I went to. And then she would like go into the classroom and was like, why are you bullying my daughter? You know, she would be in tears, and the teacher was there, but even the teacher didn't have tools or even the capacity of how to deal with these kind of situations. Because I think deep down they also felt the way. Because anything that's normalized, anything that they're not doing to fight this in their own schools, they also think it's okay.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
So I already knew like growing up that, you know, my parents always say you have to work 200% in order to go anywhere. You have to keep pushing. You have to push even harder than anyone else to get that work, get that A in your education and everything. So it's always been a very huge pressure because of these instances, you know, in the background. So, and then when I come into work life as a student, you know, I remember like one of my bosses, I was working at this retail store, and what he said was like, you're an illegal immigrant. He would laugh at me on that. But that was a microaggression.
Like as a joke?
Yeah,
or-
as a joke,
Yeah.
because I want to take some time off, or like I was going to my Erasmus and I was telling him like, I'm sorry, but I have to go, or I have to take this trip, because it's my field trip from the university, and he was like, you're an illegal immigrant. Like it was a joke, but it was still the undertones of microaggression.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say this.
He meant it.
Yeah. You wouldn't say that to a white British person, like you're an illegal immigrant, right? It has to be to do with something of my ethnicity for you to say something like that. So it was kind of a lot of these things, and it wasn't like, I kind of feel like sometimes the narrative right now when it comes to racism is really between the white and the black, and I'm like, but I don't feel that way, because for me, I've had black people become racist towards me. I have Pakistani people becoming racist towards me. I have Indians being racist towards me. I have like white people being racist towards me. So we have like the brunt of everything, almost, I feel like. And it kind of, and I don't know, it's just, there's so many layers, like in my work life, in my personal life, where I felt kind of discriminated. Like I get gaslighted a lot. There was, I think, me and my daughter's father, we often argue over instances that I felt I was being discriminated, and he didn't see it. And there's many incidences that were like that. There was one moment where I was on a bus with my daughter, and the guy was like telling my daughter, like, you should speak Norwegian. And one day maybe I didn't work for NRK or whatever, something. I couldn't quite understand like the last part of it. But I understood like when he says that, your daughter should learn Norwegian. And then like everyone else on the bus was kind of listening in. And then I got really angry because there was this Middle Eastern guy, and it's like going, oh, forget about it. He's just saying whatever, you don't have to do it. It's not that serious. And then this black guy who was standing next to me, and he was telling me like, he's just drunk, don't worry about it, don't think about it. But, if there's anything that I can see that's happened, I would jump and protect you, kind of thing. But still, like, even though you have like two men of color, basically, who kind of almost showing support or your ally, but equally at the same time is dampening the experience that you're experiencing, dictating how you should feel and do, that made me annoyed. And so it kind of, I think it's just like, I don't know, it's just like all these experiences that I had, like I remember you were asking me like, why did I start the Oslo Desk? Why did I kind of go into this work that I did? For me, it wasn't, I didn't think too much about it, but it was just like I tried to explain, was like my innate nature to protect and serve, and like for the pain that I have to go through, for all the things that I have to go through, I don't want or wish that upon anyone. And I want to raise awareness about that. I want to tell those stories because I don't think people know about it, but also there is generally like this way of thinking like Norway is so perfect, there's absolutely no racism. That's not true. It's just that it's very subtle, it's very structural. The things that happen in your face that almost rarely happens. I think there's a smartness to Norwegians.
To know not to do
that,
it,
especially
very
the
obviously.
intellectual ones, the ones that are very, very sort of subtle. They would say in the comments, they would say in their policies, or this is the way it is, this is the culture. If you don't fit in, you get out, kind of thing. It's just those kind of small ways of things, like a dialogue that you would have with them, that I'm like going, you have a bit of bias. I don't think you understand that. Either if it's conscious or unconscious, sometimes it's hard to know. And it's really harder to fight. Whereas in the UK, it's just like, I take for granted that in the UK, like a lot of those before me has fought hard on racism on all fronts. There's something that we don't often talk about here in Norway is language discrimination. In the other episode, we talk a little bit more about this, but in terms of, like recently, I was telling you as well, like this week felt like a fight for me. And now I'm at a point where I need a rest because I've been fighting for like 7 years on these topics a lot. And this week alone, I'm currently trying to write a book, my own autobiography of all the things that's been happening to me. And I was looking at, or recommended to me, about this publishing company who is having this grant for minority writers and everything. And so I reached out, emailing Jørundal, which is the publishing company, asking like if it was okay to write in the book in English and then get it translated in Norwegian. And then I had like 2 lines quickly back, like, no. And I'm like going, so you are the definition of a narrow-minded company, publishing company, who doesn't know their role in culture, and doesn't know its role in society.
And to think the grant is for migrant people who wants to write a book.
Right. So, but in the criteria, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't publish the criteria on the website. It's like, you know, we are looking for people who speaks a minority like language. So, I kind of felt a bit punished, being born in the UK. So, I have a fluency in English more than I do with my Cantonese. So I'm kind of struggling, like, I can't write in Norwegian, and I can't write in Cantonese, but English is my language. But shouldn't they be looking at the story? Shouldn't they look at the value of what I'm contributing to the literature, to the culture, and being more inclusive. As a society, as a publishing company?
As how they publish it to be as well.
Right, exactly. Like, I mean, it's not like they don't translate books from English to Norwegian anyway. So, but my whole entire story is based in Norway, you know, and a large part of my life is now in Norway. And so I got really, really angry, and I'm like going, is this a fight I should take on? Because it's like, basically, I don't see the difference between my role working in the media and what they're doing in publishing. Because as a media, you know, we're trying to change perspective, we're trying to raise awareness of things, we're trying to create dialogue and, you know, create, you know, a more inclusive society in general. I mean, that was the basis of the whole entire Oslo Desk that I was trying to, is a symbolic to, and as a way of showing what can be done in media, how to be inclusive, how do you show inclusivity in language, and not speaking Norwegian or into that morsmål level, which is like the mother tongue level, shouldn't be a barrier to reach your potential as a talent. Because you should be looking at those other parts of that person, you know, the identity of that person, that the skill sets and everything. And that's what I try to do with my newsroom. As an inclusive and diverse newsroom, bringing people like you on, you know, and it's my little fight. You know, I've been fighting this in the media and as a journalist for years. But then I'm looking at this publishing world like, oh my God, should I take this on? Because I'm already doing the She Witness, which is fighting against, you know, gender-based violence, particularly among immigrant women who are experiencing this, you know, who has, you know, different access points to the public institution for help, but also they get discriminated at the same time. You know, there's so many layers to this. And of course, we're looking at racism as well, you know, in the public or in their work life and everything that I'm looking into. And now there's this publishing on top of it that I need to deal with. It's like, oh. And then another incident that happened was like, so my daughter started joining football. And we had this parents meeting last week, and I was going to this parents meeting, and I was explaining to them that, you know, I wasn't able to kind of answer in the app that I was coming, but I messaged the leader. And as soon as I walked in, I see the leader there, and there's like this other 2 people, and this lady who was white Norwegian, and I was explaining the situation, like, yeah, I don't know why, you know, if we can compare. And then she made a comment of like going, yeah, men du er her. You're here. That is a microaggression for me. It's easy for me to spot. There's microaggressions of, would you say that to a white Norwegian? And then I realized in that room, as the room was getting filled up, you know, all white parents. And I was concerned. I was concerned how my daughter is going to fit in this football club. But also, I also heard situations on the football pitch of violence happening. And I kind of wonder, like, my place and role in it. Should I speak up? Should I say something, you know? And the situation as well with me and her father. And as I was walking home, there was these two teenage boys who dressed up in their football kits, and they were obviously going to training. And they said something to me like, "What you looking at?" I wasn't even looking at them at that point. And then they made some comments as well, and I end up like sort of tuning out when stuff like that happened, because immediately my body felt triggered, and I just want to go home and feel safe. And then I could only imagine, like, if the teenage boys were like this, and I'm looking at the parents, we already have an issue here. You know, if the parents are thinking it's okay, and they're not even teaching their sons, or, you know, the teenagers to be respectful of people, then, you know, this would perpetuate, and this would affect my daughter as well. So, you know, that's just in a week this week that I had to deal with, on top of my work schedule and everything, and also like trying to create some kind of ripple effect in the society to make some kind of impact, I think.
And I can just imagine anybody who's going to be watching this and listening to this and could relate to those microaggressions, and they would just think, oh, that was just a dismissive act, that was not something. But when you realize that, oh, that's really something that a person wouldn't do to another person who's not a person of color, you realize that, oh, that's really targeted at me. And it shouldn't be done to me and to other people. And I think that's what we've been talking about in the rest of the episodes that we've been having. And knowing you've been a journalist for many years. And as for me, when I met you, I did want to ask you, do these experiences, all these years of collective memory of what you've been experiencing both in your home country and in Norway, did that have a effect as to why you wanted to keep the Oslo Desk, and why you are doing the podcast as well? How do these experiences affect the work that you do now?
I think I explained to you before, like when I went into doing the Oslo Desk, it was kind of me proving to Norway and Norwegians what I'm capable of. Because I was entering in a career, because before that I wanted to go into micropaleontology. So I was a geoscientist, and you know, I want to go into research in the lab and explore, but it was just impossible for me to get into that niche or that field, because I was up against like 200 and 300 candidates, you know, fighting for a PhD or whatever. And so I had to kind of do a career change, and looked into communication, looked into journalism. And when I was starting out in journalism, I knew it was going to be a steep climb. And even when I did my B1 exam, you know, the Norwegian exam, and I passed it and everything, I knew that I'm not going to be, people are not giving me a chance, basically. I tried emailing, you know, with my broken Norwegian and saying like, hey, I really, really want to try, you know, just give me an internship, you know, I really would like to. But I kept getting no's, I keep getting rejections, and I'm going like, how am I going to survive? How am I going to do this? And I have a daughter to think about. I was a single mom. And then when I started out with the Oslo Desk, it was a burning desire to write the stories that I was hearing, and like to prove a point that I can become a good journalist. I can become a good writer, because during that time I was a creative writer. I was a poet, I was blogging and all this stuff. So I was doing a lot of training by myself, and doing a lot of studying, like reading a lot of newspapers, The Guardian to the New York Times and so forth, and looking at the structure and like learning the skills as I was going along. And I was very lucky that I had like several mentors along the way who taught me to become the better journalist that I am today. And so I didn't think too much about the impact that I was making. I didn't think too much about what I would encounter, but it was just a burning desire to become a journalist. Just wanted to so badly that I created that space for me, and I realized there was other journalists like me who had more experience who wanted to continue with that, and people who are storytellers, and I wanted to create that kind of space for them. And it was kind of me throwing into people's face, like, look what I've done. You know, I've written these articles and with my broken Norwegian, and I can still get a story out, you know, and I can still do it in English, and you know, we can be as inclusive, you know, because I did like volunteer in a local newspaper, but even then I felt like they didn't have the competency in terms of intercultural competency, but also like culturally and things like that, working on these other stories that were much more sensitive, because I had a backlash on one of my stories. So when it was kind of from that point, and then after the 7 years of accumulating this insight and so many people reaching out to me, just so many people reaching out to me about their story. Sometimes I don't publish those stories, sometimes they just wanted someone to talk to and tell, that I realized what is really going on in our society. And then last year, I was literally almost already telling people that I was shutting down the Oslo Desk because I couldn't take it anymore. Like, the journey of having a startup company and getting so many barriers of getting funding, and I'm sure like a lot of startup people would understand the process of getting funding and you know, getting the right team and everything. It kind of, the burden was so large, I was literally sacrificing my time with my daughter. I was kind of sacrificing a lot for something I didn't know whether it was worth it. Because I kind of feel like I'm trying to save others, but I can't save myself. And so it was only until the last year when I started like telling people like I was struggling a lot financially and everything, that that people started telling me like how much the Oslo Desk meant to them in a way that I didn't even think about. So we were doing a lot of like these podcasts and these interviews, and often people would thank me, like, you're so important. You are so important. Because I was struggling also with suicidal thoughts at the time as well. Like, a part of me just wanted to die. Part of me just wanted that pain to go away because I was just getting so tired of living here. I was so tired of just having to struggle so much. So anything like accumulated to this racism issues and personal issues, it was just getting too much and much. So when it came to Oslo Desk, I'm like going, I don't have the strength. I really don't have the strength to pull this through, and I really don't know the meaning of it. Is it even useful or anything? It was just like, for me, I just did it. And then along came like Michelle and her Lift Every Voice project.
Oh, yes.
And then we had the exhibition, and it was a time of my struggle, and she would literally walk me into these exhibitions like, this is your work with the Oslo Desk, where you were there at the Black Lives Matter movement. You were there. And had you not been there,
This wouldn't be possible,
without you. So people were more and more telling me about those things, and even the articles that I've written previously, what that meant to them. Because they're like, you put and articulated things of what I was experiencing that I didn't even could articulate. You allowed me to have a voice. You empowered me with certain words and terminologies that were happening to me, like the abuse cases and things like that. And it was accumulation of all those things, really, that really, like, with this whole entire day witness, I think this was more powerful for me because, like, every interview I had at the end of it was like, when I asked them about the solution, I wasn't even thinking so much about my role in it, but more like,
what they thought about a solution. Like I was thinking they were targeting the government, the institutions, but a lot of times like they were saying, you are the one. You know, it's people like you who's telling these stories, giving that space that I feel safe and secure and feel listened to and heard. That I feel like there's some hope. So I think for me, like when people said more and more of these things and believed in me in the way that I didn't believe in myself and the work that I do, that kind of gave me some hope to kind of carry on, because I do not want to dampen anyone's hope. And so if the Oslo Desk gives so many people so much hope and that space, it just gives me a little bit more strength to go on. I'm not saying that I can give it that push this year, but at least like, because I'm in my own healing process as well, that I'm starting to rework certain things, like strategizing how do we move forward with the Oslo Desk, and you know, doing more projects like this with the NGOs like Caritas and Humans for Humans in this project in the Day Witness, because everything kind of led from one thing to the other. And Day Witness came about because of the She Witness project. The She Witness project came about because of the investigation I was doing in the Oslo Desk. So everything sort of fell into place. And then it's only now when I'm reflecting back in the 7 years, when I really have that time now sometimes to have that breathing space, and in my therapy sessions where I'm like, damn, okay, like, that's what I've done.
This is what happened after all those effort. I remember us talking about you introducing the Day Witness podcast to me, and I remember us having that Zoom call that we're having a lot of trouble, a lot of problems with inviting people to talk. I remember you, I, Sarah, and Claudia, we were like, oh, we need the list of people that we need to talk to. And then I think after that meeting, we were like, oh yeah, I can invite this person. I'm not sure if she's gonna talk. I'm not sure, you know, all these uncertainties. And then suddenly we get, and then week by week, we get another person who wants to talk, another person, and the episodes aren't even out yet. I think the last episode that, a last teaser that we've been put out is still in the She Witness podcast. And we're now getting to the Day Witness podcast. And the episodes are going to be out in a few days. And we're getting that traction that that we didn't have at the start of the podcast.
Yeah, because from the She Witness podcast, we had so many issues with that particular podcast because it is a very, very tough topic.
Very personal as well.
And not many people would want to show up and talk about this particular unpleasantness. And obviously I threw myself out there, with my own story in the She Witness. So we were anticipating in the Day Witness that we were going to experience something similar as well, because discrimination is a very difficult topic to talk about. But then things were coming in and it was like, oh, this is easy, a lot easier. I think within a month we were able to get so many people, more than 5, and then we were trying to schedule people in. And obviously what people don't know is that I do a night shift job at a hotel, so I'm literally working 7 nights in a row and then 7 nights off. And sometimes we would have these studios, interviews. I'm literally coming from my night shift job and then I'm coming into the studio and doing these interviews. And then during my nights off, I'm we'll be storming through the podcast interviews and also editing processes, and we're having our meetings as well. So it was delightful for me to kind of be able to, and have that privilege to sit in a position to listen to these stories, and just people telling me continuously, I feel safe talking to you about my story than it would be for a white Norwegian,
You've literally become the support system. That what we've been doing has become a support system, and will be support system to other people who might share these stories, these experiences.
Definitely, and I think it really shows what the space is about. And also, I do not think these stories would come out had it not been the person. I'm not bragging about myself, but rather being understanding of, because I lived through those experiences, and that makes me a better journalist in this area that often in this industry often use it against you. Oh, just because you're a minority, doesn't mean like you know it all kind of thing. But it's more like I'm a first generation immigrant here, which means I do not have Norwegian as my mother tongue. So I would have the same barrier as many of those who are experiencing racism here in a certain way. So, and because we are, we have the almost similar scars, I kind of feel that pain, and I can navigate this narrative and make sure that it is a dignifying way of telling their stories. So for me, it's very a point of privilege to just sit and listen. And when they were telling me their stories, I'm like, this is happening, this is happening to you, and it's sad to hear it, but I think it's only until we can utilize these stories in a way that to raise awareness, but also to kind of lobby for change. Because I always think like no story should be left just in the air to be listened to. It should be done with some kind of action afterwards. And I'm hoping like if there's politicians listening to this, and I hope that if there's any organization, and even if you're a leader or a manager, that you will listen to these stories in a certain way of openness, of these kind of experiences, and understand that it's happening to your company in many different ways. So, I don't really know how it would look like, in terms of, this podcast onward and anything, but it's just like the stories I've listened to up until now, the one common thing that keeps showing up was not being heard, not being believed. So I want that if people are listening in, like if someone is telling you about the experiences of discrimination or racism of any kind, believe it first, and another thing that was very, very common that I think is that a lot of them didn't think that they can speak up. And that's very worrying for a democratic society that we're in Norway. And that really relies on every individual voter in Norway of what kind of society are we living in. If you are talking about democracy, if you're talking about equality, is not our lives important? I'm concerned of the bigger state of things, like these are individual stories, but collectively they are an issue in society for me, and that kind of keeps me up at night, unfortunately. And I keep thinking like, when can we move on from this? It is very systemic, it's very embedded in the culture, and there's like this exclusivity, going back to the publishing company, that I kind of feel like it's that narrative exclusiveness, like you don't belong, that worries me. And in many of these cases of all the stories is either in work life or even in public health. Astonishingly hearing stories of how basically, I want to tie up your tubes, because I don't want to have any foreign kids in this country. That was worrying for a gynecologist or a doctor to say such a thing. And I have my own experiences with the public health system as well that was very, very discriminatory in many ways. But then you just kind of think like, you have so much fight going on, and we do get tired, and we do need our allies to kind of show up for us, even though it may seem like they're white saviors, and I'm sure like in many cases it may feel that way, but we do need them as allies. We do need to work with them, and I have come to that point to understand it's not us against them, it's really us together against the problem of racism and discrimination to kind of move forward in that sense.
Exactly. I agree with everything you just said. I agree. In hearing, for everybody's information, I'm the one who has to listen to the episodes before it's out and do all the teasers. And really, that's the main point of why we want to keep this open. We want to have this platform for everybody because, as you said, for immigrants, it's unusual to speak out. It's almost like we keep telling each other, our children, to let's just keep it to ourselves and not cause any ripple, not cause any chaos as to because we're afraid that we might make it harder for somebody else. But really, what we've discovered in the episodes that we've been having for the Day Witness podcast is that, when we speak up together, we create this voice that eventually nobody can, shut down anymore. And then we will have more opportunities to make it better for the future generation. And then maybe we don't have to wait too long. As you've said, you've been doing this for a very long time, for years. And now you kind of see what the effect is and the product of all those hard work.
Yeah, but I'm very radical. So like when it comes to these issues, I'm very radical because I feel like Norway is like 10, 20 years behind. And I don't think we can wait that long. In those 10, 20 years, we have a population of 1 million immigrants here. In that 1 million, they're going to get 1,000 cuts. And what I mean by cuts is like the cuts and scars that you don't see from racism. It's like one microaggression here, and then another comment here, and then we have thousands of cuts on our bodies that you just don't see every day that we carry, and it's a burden on top of financial struggles and everything else. And so for me, it's like the aggression that we have, particularly in these topics, we have a good reason for it. We have a very good reason for it to be aggressive in trying to make that change, to try and push the politicians for that lobbying, for institutions to do better, actually, because I kind of feel like even the tribunal is like, how good are they to really understand this? Because they should be informative in how they're handling cases too. I know that in certain ways that they did, they are a body of hope in some ways, but there needs to be improvement in that as well. And also, I want to mention is I've also learned a lot from all these different discriminations as well. From the au pair. Recently, there's an article that just came out that now the government is going to shut down the au pair program, which is what they had feared for a very long time because they feel that was a backlash if they spoke up because they want to shut down the program. Now, the problem is with this kind of narrative from the government is that you're saying, I'm going to normalize the behavior of the abuser. And then you victim blame the people who spoke up, which is the au pair. And I think that this demonstrates very well on that high level of policymakers making the wrong decision here. What they should have done is that we're going to have the au pair program because it's an opportunity for those from the Philippines to come over or wherever to be able to experience the culture. And those who abuse the system, hold them accountable. Get the institutions involved to make sure there is a system of justice. So what they're saying is we don't want to work with this, so we're going to cut this down. And the whole entire narrative is we're just going to let the abusers continue to abuse. And then and they're just not going to get, maybe a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
But those victims, those survivors who spoke up, we blame them, because they spoke up. So that's the kind of narrative that you see in this a lot. So I can understand the great fear of speaking up. And why I always try to be extremely careful. I cannot control the outcome of what would happen if you tell the story, but be consciously aware of the backlash that may happen, but also standing true and saying that's why I also speaking up about this particularly because it's the government is shutting this down, and that is not okay, And as a journalist, and you have to follow up, and of course there's a difficulty, particularly with the Oslo Desk, is that we often are underfunded or no funding, and I literally tell people when I had a salary, I would literally put about 10% or 15% of it into the Oslo Desk to pay for whatever it needs to be paid, to order for it to run. And I can't keep doing that, Times have changed in that sense. So in a sense, like this Day Witness podcast and the work that I've done with the Oslo Desk, with the She Witness as well, is really just to amplify those voices in the best way possible, and looking at how we can use those voices collectively to create some kind of change systemically. And it is going to be a long journey, and I'm, whilst being radical and impatient, I am trying to be patient as I go along, because with that kind of sheer momentum, you need a lot of energy. And right now, I'm at a place where I'm at a place of healing and in my own journey that I'm slowing down a little bit, because I haven't really taken good rest, and my body is showing up on a lot of signs of that. So
Yeah. Hearing all those stories that we've been, recording for the podcast, and having all these people that we've interviewed coming in, how do you see the future after all the episodes are out, after all these stories are out there, not just among these four corners? How do you see the future?
I think there is some hope. I see that we have, especially from my circle, my network, and the people I've met, we're all fighting the same thing. And if we band together and group together and collaborate, we can create change. The only thing that I feel sometimes that's stopping change is when there's a lot of ego involved in a lot of collaboration work. Like, there are people who are in their pockets of doing this thing and that thing, and they want to collaborate, and and they want to shine. They want to be the star of it. And I have been declaring time and time over, like, I don't want to be the center stage. I want people with me, because it makes me stronger that way on stage, to fight these causes, and I can't do that alone. And I think there is a bit more awareness. I think there are very brave younger people who speak fluent Norwegian that are rising up and speaking up. But to be able to create change, there needs to be strategy forward. There needs to be politicians on board to understand all the elements of what discrimination is about, because even, there are particular, like, forums that I've been in, like, for example, Mirror Center. The founder of Mirror Center at one point, she was sitting with the mayor of Oslo on the stage, and she basically said there's no such thing as systemic racism. And then when you have people like that who are dealing with racism but don't really understand it, that's detrimental for all the other people who are doing that. So I believe that education, insight, knowledge is so necessary for this type of work. And I think we're just getting to the surface of it, especially here in Norway. But to get a deeper, substantial understanding of it, it requires, one, letting go of ego. Secondly, letting go of whatever coping mechanism you have as a knee-jerk reaction to someone saying, like, we're living in a racist country and you're not being okay with that. That's on you, really, to deal with your own, like, issues with this. Like, if you're feeling anger, if you're feeling like you shouldn't be in this country, that's on you, it's not on us. And that they have to work through whatever that's going through that. Because I feel like a lot of times you have to break down that whatever coping mechanism that they have that as knee-jerk, and then once they're back into that calm part of their mind, that they're open to listen, and then that is the way where we can actually have dialogue. But that point of barrier where you shut once you feel like you've been attacked, I feel like a lot of what Norwegians here, white Norwegians, or whatever, any Norwegian or any person who is feeling that being attacked, particularly when there's a comment that, racism is involved, there's a lot of working inside of them that they have to deal with and stuff. You cannot rely on someone else for that burden to kind of navigate you through, because what I feel like in a lot of our work is that we become therapists for others. We end up like having to, okay, manage that conversation. Have I got you to that calm phase? If that's calm, then I'm gonna tell you why racism does happen and why like we have to do something about it, and I want you to be involved in that. And this is a two-way dialogue as well. It's not like me pushing you and you go ahead and do something about it kind of thing. It is a two-way thing. So it was kind of like in the future, like based upon those kind of things, I think honestly it's really difficult. Like I like to be like optimist, but I also feel like we're walking backwards right now in Norway. We're going forwards, and then we're going 2 steps forward, and we're going 4 steps back. And we're 2 steps forwards, and 4 steps back. And it's just like, it's really difficult. But equally, I feel like the younger generation of Norwegians, they're a bit more open. And that we're kind of pacing forward. But I think it's a collective effort. If we can get the whole entire fabric of society, no matter what rank you are in a company or industry-wise, is everyone to be sort of more conscientious of their role in society, role in their work, role in their friendship with some person of color or in their family, that I think that's when you can really do a big shift. But when you have pockets of shift, although that's working, you still have suffering. And although like suffering is part of life, but this type of suffering, this is man-made. Just like, you know, global warming is sort of man-made, depending on where you stand on that. But for me, it's like, if it's man-made, it can be solved. And it can be done like that if you have the will to do it. And it takes so much internal part of you to recognize that, to want to do that you can actually make change happen. And for me, like, working in media has such a huge influence on the masses that was my hope, to create change in my own way. But up beyond that, I don't think there is any country that I know that has eradicated racism or discrimination totally. It's going to hang around for a while. Into what degree, I don't know. So a long-winded answer is, I don't know about the future. I can only base it upon the people that are advocating, the people who are fighting, the people who are doing something about it, and for people to keep showing up and speaking up. Like the Black Lives Matter movement was a sheer example of the Black community fighting back of what they had to go through. And that was hopeful. But even though if you go to the exhibition right now in Frogner, then you'll see a lot of those interviews where they said that nothing has quite changed. But I think sometimes, just like as you are maybe losing weight, you know, and you're working out, you don't see things in months. You might have to see things in years. And I think like sometimes being patient, that maybe we're able to make that change happen. But if you ask me this in a couple of years' time, I might give you a different answer to this. But right now,
I hope so. I hope so.
But right now, I can say I don't know, because it's just like I'm seeing a lot of things happening, and I'm also seeing a lot of things not happening. And like particularly with the Parliament right now here, I'm pretty disappointed on a lot of fronts. So.
Yeah, we've come to the end of our podcast, our interview as well, and I have high hopes with not just with what we expect the podcast will do, but as to, you know, the network that we've created, the support system that we've created with the people that we've invited, and the people that even want to be invited. We've been hearing, you know, from our end, from different ends of this project, that there are a lot of people wanting to talk, wanting to discuss not just telling the stories, but wanting to be involved with what needs to be done. And so may I just ask, like, what message do you want to send to somebody who might be interested in talking or interested in working with us? I'm sure it's not just the people of color who are, hearing this, but maybe those who might want to do something to help us fight racism.
I mean, for me, like with the Day Witness, maybe this will not be the total end, I guess, episode. I think that it will be channeled in other ways. What I really, really, really want to say is more sort of examples of allies showing up, of what they're doing in their company or what they're doing in the industry or wherever, like how they're showing up to help us fight racism and discrimination, how they are changing, admitting to your own biases is not a sign of weakness. For me, is absolute sexiness. There you go. Let's put a trend, Let's put a trend there, because it's like when someone speaks up about understanding that, it means you have growth. It means that you have a growth mindset, like you have to work on something inside of you, like your own biases, you've done something wrong, you speak up about it, owing up to knowing that you're in wrong and not being on the side of the oppressors. That for me is an act of courage, is an act of growth, is an act of maturity, emotionally, and that's what I want to see more of. So when we're talking about these topics, I really, really, really hope that people are not listening and it's like, oh my God, you just fuck back to your own country then. Because that's often the response of many when they listen to this. If you didn't like it here, go. But the thing is, it's like, like a lot of the people who are here can't go. Like for me, like my daughter is here. Like, even if I go back to the UK, which is my home country, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be writing off the same issue. Racism is a global issue. It's pandemic in its own, and so when you say that, it has a lot to you taking accountability and responsibility for yourself, creating the society that that it is today, a society that racism still lives, is a society that violence still lives, and you may think like, well, what can I do about it? I don't have money. I'm not going to have the time to join a group because I have my kids to take care of or whatever. It's your interaction. If you're a parent, like if your kids are going to football club or whatever, are you talking to the parent of color? Are you including them in? Do you have a WhatsApp group? Do you have a group that you're also including them in? Are you making it easier? Are you helping them translate? There are times where I would be sitting next to a parent of color and I'll be translating for them because I understood Norwegian enough to translate back to them. It's just those tiny acts of kindness towards the other person that is fulfilling enough, because those tiny acts of kindness, like for me, the coach driver who drove me all the way to the next bus stop, he didn't have to do that. But that, till this day, I'm like, I was a student like, 12, 13, 14 years ago? All those years, that one kindness still stick with me. That gave me some hope that in Norway, we still have Norwegians with a kind heart. We still have Norwegians who really would like to help others. And I think our innate nature is giving. So I still hold on to that belief that in many ways we do want to do something. And I think like a lot of time people say, oh, you're a journalist, you do these like big projects, it's so huge and everything. It's like, I can't compare to you. And they find it quite intimidating that you need to do something huge in order to shift racism. But if you're internally knowing that you're biased and everything, that small, tiny bit can do so much for someone, like for me, So that's why I kind of leave it there.
I agree. We're made to be kind, and it doesn't take much to be kind. You mentioned children, parents teaching their children not to be, not to live in a society with racism. And I think a few days ago I also saw this video that they were asking children, I think it was made in the UK, and they were asking two different, racially different children, and they were asking, what do you think's different between the two of you? And they couldn't find anything. Like, oh, no, we're the same. We like the same things. And, they don't see
Color.
that.
Yeah, especially when that young.
And it's the adults, it's us who might instill that to them. And I think you've said that the younger generations here in Norway are more open to that discussion, what needs to be done. But it's also the responsibility of older generation to set that example.
Yeah.
Because when we set that example, it's just going to be naturally there that everybody's kind, everybody's inclusive, and maybe not mask other companies would, as you said, like the publishing company, they would say that, oh, we're inclusive, we want you to be here, we want you to be involved, but these are our standards, which you don't have, then you can't be with us. And so I guess,
I mean, that's the thing, like, every single time that shows up, when they go, like, oh, this diversity and inclusion on their company values or whatever, it's like, do you actually really understand what that means? Do you actually know what that means in the how it is, in the concept of it, And that really bugs me so much, like, it's just, like, hanging up there just for, I don't know, to tick a box or something, and that really annoyed me. And also what I wanted to mention was, like, one of the episode we had a lady come in who showed me the video, and it was teenagers yelling at her.
Oh, yeah. And
then when we're talking about, kids, behaving as racists, basically, like you said, it is adopted by the parents. The parents and the adults are showing this in their microaggressions, in their way of speaking to, like, a person of color. Kids, they pick up on the tiniest thing of how you behave. So you can only imagine that if a society and you're a parent and you are not equipped to understanding how this devastates everyone. Again, I will say this again, you're on the side of the oppressor, and do you want to go down in history, on that side of the road, So, that may be my harsh way, but, the experiences I have been through, it's so plenty that we haven't even gone through, like, the other half of it, I would say, that it is a serious matter. It is something that shouldn't be written off, and, it's something that I really, truly hope, like, collectively, as human beings, that we can live in a harmonized society, that we can coexist in our different ways, and just be able to accept the other person as they are in a certain way. Of course, you should never hurt another human being unintentionally or even intentionally in that sense. So just being aware, I think, goes a long way. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carmen. I've listened to so many stories, and this is such a great way to summarize maybe, and really let other people know that you really don't have to do something so grand. Maybe they think of you as, doing all these grand things as a journalist, but it really starts with the very littlest things that you do to others, and as you how you address it, and how we see the future, I guess. And maybe in a next interview, we might say that things are changing in the way that we want it to, in a more positive way, and then maybe we hear more inspiring stories, and would fuel us to keep this platform and give this opportunity to others to tell their stories as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.